Okay, I think we should begin. It's 11 o'clock. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this event organized by the Center for Public Understanding of Finance, PUFin, at the Open University Business School. My name is Ali Ataula. I'm a professor of finance and the director of the center. To see the research and teaching resources by the Center on Corporate and Personal Finance, please visit our webpage. Now, on behalf of the center, I would like to thank you all for being here today. And special thanks to our colleagues from the Money and Pension Service, who will lead the second half of the event today. Now, before I begin, I would like to mention that the event is being recorded. The recording will be shared via PUFin's webpage. Now, as we have about 6 presenters, only about 1 hour and a half, chats, microphones, and cameras are disabled. If you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A facility. The event has two parts. The first part will be based on research that the PUFin members conducted. It's a qualitative survey and the research based on that qualitative survey. This will be presented by my colleagues Fidel, Katie, and Shraddha. The second part of the event will be led by colleagues Ipak, Chris, and Paul from the Money and Pension Service, and they will present findings based on various surveys conducted by the Money and Pension Service. Now, without further delay, I pass it on to my colleague Fidel, who will explain the context of the research presented in the first part of the event. Fidel, to you, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ali, and thanks to everybody who is joining us this morning. The story of this research is a little bit not complicated, but it is something up as the seed was planted long before the research took place. The seed I'm referring to is about 9 years ago, 2015. I was part of leadership team of Citizens MK. Citizens MK is a chapter of Citizens UK, and at the time, there was a campaign being run on the living wage, which I'm very sure many of us will be familiar with. And obviously, the Citizens MK uses the community organizing model, which means that most of the campaigns are selected based on the need identified by the communities, but also the identification of people who can effect the change the communities are seeking to achieve. So while we were doing a listening exercise, it occurred to me that we needed to do something for young people who were in transition from school to work or to university, to help them to get the basic understanding of how it is to manage a budget. So I wasn't the only person who was thinking about it. There were a few of us who were thinking about it, particularly parents whose children were after going to university and they were sharing their ideas. So they said, okay, yes, the living wage is a good campaign, but maybe we should do something for young people. Unfortunately, the idea of doing some work around financial literacy did not take hold during the process, and the ideas literally stayed in my head, and I was waiting for any opportunity I would have to engage on those matters. Obviously, I know some of us have either parents or siblings who are in third level education or who have just gone into employment. If you think about it, somebody has been at home, most of their needs are catered for, maybe they get pocket money and so forth, or maybe they may even work part-time. So are we preparing them for the future where they can be independent and look after their finances? That was the initial question. So when Ali and PUFin started discussing what to do, I told them, by the way, I mean, it would be a good idea if we could resurrect this idea. And I'm more than happy to help you to access the schools locally to go and speak to young people and figure out how they are getting on and what they know, what they don't know. So that's how the idea was discussed. Eventually, you got some resources from the Open University to start. And without further ado, I think I'll go to Katie, who will be telling us about the research we did. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Fidel. So I'd like to just have a look at some of the recent literature that we looked at whilst we were preparing our research. And firstly, there has been limited research which has produced some mixed findings relating to gender and financial outcomes and literacy, with generally lower financial literacy for females, but higher levels of debt for young male adults. There has been a US study which suggests that Black, Asian and minority ethnic respondents, particularly those that looked at age 12 to 17, have lower levels of financial literacy than their white counterparts. We also looked at the Money Advice Service in a report called Financial Capability of Children, Young People and Their Parents. And this was a study that was conducted in the UK, which suggests that children in low-income households may be particularly vulnerable to poor financial capability. The report also indicated that many parents are less confident in discussing financial issues with their children, even those parents that perceive themselves as good role models. Another interesting area which was raised by Walker in 2018 relates to financial institutions and a lack of access to services for those from vulnerable backgrounds. So this research considers the wider issues of those from Black backgrounds to provide support on financial issues and raises potential issues relating to institutions. The latest survey of children and young people's financial wellbeing survey in 2023, which focuses on children and young people's financial wellbeing and capability across the UK, also highlights some interesting issues. The report finds that when compared to 2019, the same proportion of children and young people received a meaningful financial education, highlighting the need to evaluate the delivery of financial education going forward. The survey also finds that children from an Asian British or Black British ethnic minority group are more likely to have received a meaningful financial education, while those from white or other minority ethnic groups are similar to children in the UK as a whole. In addition, the findings suggest that those from Black backgrounds perform well in relation to various financial capability areas. So receiving a meaningful financial education is strongly linked to good financial attitudes and behaviours, and those who receive financial education both at home, so from parents or carers, and school benefit the most. The issue of mental health and ethnicity too has been recently reported on, and the study discusses both income levels and challenges, with benefits for those from ethnic backgrounds more likely to have household bill arrears, and that there is a sense of possible exclusion from accessing services for some of those from these backgrounds. There has also been another US study by Kim and Chatterjee in 2013, in which child financial socialization experiments were shown to be positively related to beneficial financial practices and asset ownership in adulthood. So parental warmth was negatively associated with credit card balance. And those respondents who had their spending monitored by their parents when they were children were significantly more likely to report being good at managing their own money. It was also noted that financial socialization research tended to be limited to the immediate nuclear family, and the role of others such as school, media and peers needs to be explored. And only one study has been found which meaningfully sought to account for the impact of ethnicity and financial literacy. And again, this was in the US. A quantitative cross-sectional sample of 7,417 US teenagers, again aged between 12 and 17. Lusada suggested that BAM respondents had lower levels of financial literacy when compared to their white counterparts. There has also been another UK adult financial wellbeing study in 2021 called the Ethnicity Report, which also finds that managing financially is more challenging for those from Black and mixed heritage backgrounds, indicating the need for the deeper exploration of issues faced by those from these backgrounds. So the literature review indicates some interesting areas for further research on a range of issues related to financial capability. Our research responds to this need by exploring the lived experiences of Black students aged between 15 and 17, focusing on a group where there is mixed evidence in the literature, but one that's been identified as experiencing higher financial vulnerability than their white counterparts as adults. So the research focuses on some of the research gaps identified by focusing on students' perceptions related to financial capability and the day-to-day experiences of managing money as they approach financial independence. It also explores the wider context and issues faced by the students in managing their finances. So I'd like to hand over to Shraddha, who's going to talk about the methodology and the key findings that we found in our research.
Thank you very much, Katie. And I would just ask you to skip on the slide, as appropriate. As Katie said, we're addressing some of the gaps in the literature or areas which are pertinent for delving further into financial education for school students of this age. So our research aims to deepen understanding of the lived finance related experience of Black school-age students who are contemplating either transitioning into work or A-level study, or transitioning from A-level study into further study or into work. And our two key contributions are to explore in more depth a group which has mixed evidence in the literature in relation to financial capability, but where higher financial vulnerability is indicated in adulthood, and also to deepen our understanding of behaviour, skills and needs using a qualitative research approach. Katie, could you move on the slide, please? So we interviewed 25 Black students in years 10 and 12 from the ages of 15 to 17 in two schools in Milton Keynes, Shenley, Brookend and St Paul's Catholic schools. And we would like to record our thanks to both schools for all their help in this research. We employed semi-structured interviews, enabling us to ask a set of questions to all participants, but giving space to follow up on anything that was raised by the students. Each interview lasted for around 30 minutes, and we undertook a thematic analysis using NVivo software. We split our findings into broadly two areas, similarities to students in general, but also areas which were indicative of differences, although we would at this stage like to highlight that these were differences in emphasis rather than in categorical or distinct ways. So, focusing first on some of the similarities, first of all, we saw spending being split into broadly three categories: day-to-day spending on regular low-cost items such as travel to school and lunches, semi-frequent spending on mainly leisure activities or purchase of relatively low-cost items, but also spending on larger one-off items. There was generally good awareness of day-to-day spending habits, with much more consideration of semi-frequent and one-off purchases. And indeed, it was in the semi-frequent mid-tier level of spending that most students found it most difficult to make financial decisions. Most students appeared to be able to save or budget for the bigger purchases, and some stated that they felt moderately confident about making financial decisions, although of course there was a variety of view presented with the total number of students that we talked to. Students were primarily influenced by friends and family, and their own needs and desires, and most indicated online research for items, but stated that they weren't too influenced by influencers and other online material. Those with elder siblings indicated that they sought advice from their elder siblings on financial matters, particularly. And that chimes with the value of having peer or near peer support in relation to financial education, perhaps. Most of the students we spoke to recalled elements of financial education they had received, but with limited links to their common spending decisions. Katie, could you move on? So I've just picked up a couple of quotes here. So moderately confident at looking at regular spending. I look at the money I have and see what the cheapest option is. How can I save a little bit more without spending it all? So sort of aware of the regular spending decisions they're making, but also, another student raising the complexity of that mid-tier level. When I get paid, I try to save. I really do try. If not, I just buy clothes. I buy whatever I need. I buy food. I go out. So it's at that mid-tier that there is less capability. Katie, if you could move it on. Okay, so now looking at some areas of difference. First of all, focusing on future plans. Most students were planning to go to university, but 20% were considering an apprenticeship instead of the traditional degree route, with one going into further education or intending to get a job and one not being identified. So university certainly seemed for the group that we studied to be the most popular route to go forward, but there were others on apprenticeships, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Katie, if you could just. Okay, so in relation to some of the areas, and again, these were mainly of emphasis rather than categorically different or distinct, would like to today highlight 3 of those areas. First is that of trust and who the students sought advice from. And this was overwhelmingly family members. Some mentioned friends, but to a much lower extent. And whilst, a few mentioned teachers, that wasn't something that came up very often. And other institutions were not really mentioned. And this may indicate issues of wider knowledge or trust in maybe more official or potentially more knowledgeable sources of help. Sort of that was indicated at this stage, but may have an implication for later on in life. The second is on making spending decisions. So there was a mixed picture in relation to confidence, as you would expect, but some students identified some extreme measures, such as completely cutting up bank cards and or setting themselves really stringent spending budgets. And these strategies were decided by the students themselves and didn't and seemed somewhat separate to any financial education received. So that was something that was interesting to follow up on. And some students raised entrepreneurship, and that might be related to the perception of opportunities later in life, perhaps opportunities for those from this particular background in being able to achieve at the highest levels in organizations. So seeing entrepreneurship as an alternative, and also that kind of factor might also have been at the back of the minds of some of the students who noted that they were thinking of an apprenticeship route rather than a more traditional university route. Katie, could you move on the slides? So a couple of quotes. I feel like probably family members, because I wouldn't know who else to go to, and if they would know, or probably someone that's experienced, probably teachers in school, but you know, going to teachers was not the primary source of information. And if I'm going to uni, just because my sister's already gone, so she's told me, okay, you need actually to be aware of how you're spending your money. So, you know, that near peer support group, you know, being really valuable to students. Okay, Katie, thank you. So we also asked students about what should be included in financial education, possible methods of financial education, and when financial education should be delivered. In relation to what they would find useful, many students highlighted information just before they needed it. So, for example, job-related information just as they were, you know, contemplating getting part-time jobs. Perhaps costs associated with university, probably in year 12 or early in year 13. But however, there was some appetite from some students to have financial education on issues that might be relevant further in the future, and tax seemed to be a popular topic that they wanted to know more about. A range of delivery methods were raised, including online courses, apps, but you know, still you know, valuing face-to-face case study scenario-based content, and it was definitely about the decision making rather than the mechanics of any particular financial products that the students were most interested in having financial education round. Timing, in terms of timing, most students wanted information just in advance of when required, and that can be challenging. But also there was some interest in being made aware of things that might be relevant in the future. And this does raise a tension and a dilemma on how and when to provide financial education. Either for the short term or the long term for this to be effective. And actually students themselves recognise this challenge, so something to go forward on. So Katie, if you could. Okay, so again, a couple of quotes. This is not so much about learning about a bank account or how a pension or such works. It's more about the decision, how to make good spending decisions and how much you should save. And then recognizing complexities. It's really difficult with financial education because it's something you know everybody is going to need in a few years' time, but it's not something that you particularly need right now. And yet at the point you need it, it's a bit late to start learning it. And it's really hard to get it in a way that people understand and can engage with, because it just seems like an abstract thing. So for example, paying regular bills, etc. Katie, if you could. Okay, so I've just presented some areas of the research and some of the key findings that came out of the research. And we'd really now welcome any comments, observations and questions that you have on any of the elements of what any of us have presented today.
Thank you very much, Shala. So before you put your questions on, just to mention that the report will be available on PUFin's webpage very soon. Okay, so questions, any questions for colleagues who just presented? Yeah, we got, so I think the Q&A sessions is on if you want to put your Q&A, your question in the Q&A. I think somebody's got their hand up.
I think it's Kevin.
Yeah, so Kevin and Anwar, so please go ahead. Kevin, I think if you want to ask the question, please go ahead. I wonder whether your microphone is enabled. It is disabled.
I've just allowed the mic, so Kevin should be able to speak now if he wishes to.
So yes, please, Kevin, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Sorry, my camera, my mic, and the chat were all disabled, so but I'm allowed to put my hand up, which is great. I'm just wondering, it's really hi, Shraddha, long time no see. The last bit about how you get particularly young people to engage with this. As you know, I'm kind of a fan of simulations. I wonder if there's sort of a personal finance simulation game that might, particularly if you made it competitive, that might engage and get them thinking about all the different silos of knowledge you need to put personal finance together.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, no, that is a really good idea. Certainly students were very interested in having scenario-based learning so that they could put themselves in particular situations and, see what the pressures were and whether it was something that was coming up. So, for example, university or much later in life, and they were keen to be engaged. So whether it was via an app or online, that element of sort of maybe gamification or using AI or having in some sense an opportunity to look at different scenarios and understand how they might react and some of some real life experiential learning was definitely something that came out in the interviews, and actually very much fits in with other reports by MAPS and others saying that putting students or making them aware of risk within financial capability is something that needs to be looked at, but also came out through our work.
Just to add to that, so I think, Kevin, I agree as well. We are still using the traditional methods of teaching, and all the financial education material that we have either at the OU or in other institutions. It's still very, there is a learning material. You go and you watch videos, you read the material and done. But I think you're absolutely right. There has to be new ways of teaching these skills. In addition to that, I think there are also new research emerging that takes into account what is the role of generative AI in educating young people on the use of financial technology or the technology to make good financial decisions. So I think, yeah, there's a lot to be done in this area, and hopefully there are organizations like MAPS and our own center and many other universities who are doing that. So before I go to the next colleague from the center, I think there's a question online. So this is for team in PUFin, and the question is, are you going to repeat the interviews with the same respondents to track their future decisions and situations? So Shraddha, Katie, Fidel.
Okay, yes, no, thank you for the question. I think some longitudinal research following students from when they're students into the next stage of their lives, be that study or entering work for the first time, and those who go into students who go into further study when they first enter the workplace. I think that would be a really valuable piece of research and is part of the the ideas that we have to take forward, whether we contact the same students or set up a study that tracks particular students. Yeah, we're under discussion.
Yeah, just to add to that, so there are many other surveys which are planning at the moment within PUFin, and some of them will be longitudinal. Yeah. So the next question,
if I could,
is,
so just to add on that, Ali, as well, and just to add on to the point where obviously we looked at 2 schools within Milton Keynes, so there is a plan to extend the study to the whole of the UK, just so that we're not focused within the Milton Keynes area. Yeah. So they're taking into account all the geographical distributions. Okay, so the next question is, what was the most unexpected thing that you found in your research?
Okay. Do you want me to kick off and
yes,
then
please, Katie,
someone else?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first thing that the students that we spoke to actually were really interested in financial capability and in learning more about making decisions. And actually, a lot of them did recognise that it was, a challenging and complex area. So that was interesting. And the other key finding that I would pick out is the overwhelming reliance on family for advice, almost to the exclusion of going elsewhere. And even when we asked questions of, well, perhaps it's an area that your family doesn't have experience of or doesn't know, there wasn't any other sources of information that they had in mind that they could access. So I think that was the other piece that I would pick up on.
And just to add on to that as well, Shraddha, the thing that I was most surprised about was how students were devising their own strategies. For example, Shraddha mentioned about cutting up their cards so they wouldn't spend, but just also this notion of not spending money for a certain period of time until they had enough money saved up. That for me was quite surprising. They weren't, looking to borrow the money from other places. They were actually looking to save themselves. So I thought that was really, really encouraging.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I was to add something which I found interesting was the fact that obviously there was a more or less consensus among those I spoke to that financial literacy was more or less like a must-have, although there was an issue as to how you actually go and acquire it. And something else which surprised me was how much older siblings influence the approach of a younger sibling, because some of those people who said we are going to set up businesses when they grow up, it was because one of their siblings was talking about it. So you can't not understate the value of family in such a kind of areas, which was alluded to earlier by Shraddha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and that just to finish off Fidel's point, where there were elder siblings, they were really, really influential on our students, and influential, generally, positively and highlighting some of the complexities, but sometimes also offering maybe some unrealistic options, going into a business and earning a lot of money very quickly and then just not working again. So, that was also part of the picture.
Yeah, so please do add your questions in the Q&A. I'll read out the next question is from Karine. I think you have answered a part of that question, but I'll read it anyway. Are there examples of financial decision-making education using role models? Young people in this age group are perhaps sensitive to influence from people they admire.
Okay, so if I kick off and then if everyone could kick in. Thanks, Karine, for the question. In terms of role models, it generally turned to the family. Generally turned, if there were siblings, they were hugely influential. And when we asked the question about, where students found information about purchases, they did say that it was predominantly online, but they did the research themselves. And, whilst, influencers were there and that there was various other elements of advertising, they did look to what they perceived to be their needs and wants and did the research on the items that they wanted rather than being overly influenced by these influencers. And so it, that was interesting. There were one or two who said, yeah, they did look at the influences, but on the whole, it was mainly family with a bit of their own research.
I think, sorry, Ali, I think what was interesting was like Shraddha said, they weren't just looking at one person, they were doing their own research and they were looking at lots of different sources. And that was actually quite eye-opening as well.
Would you like to add something to that?
The only thing I was going to add is that the fact that there was also some sort of peer looking at what your colleagues were doing and sometimes running your ideas by your classmates and so forth.
Mm.
So I mean that's another influencers maybe from the family, but they can also be from the school in particular if you think they know something more than what you know.
Although I would also then just add there that when we asked about having conversations with friends about money, there was some, some said they asked their friends, but to a lesser extent, and there was still a little bit of, we don't really like to talk about money with friends necessarily, and we may talk about some things, but it was very much more a personal thing, and they didn't necessarily want to share too much, even with friends. So there was, sort of that, interesting complexity there as well.
Yeah, so there's a comment by IPAC. We consistently find that main role models, even at the age of 16 to 17, are still parents, carers. So a lot of research in the literature in that sense on the impacts of parents. Thanks, IPAC. So we've got two people who have questions. They have not put in the Q&A. So if Emily, if you can just unmute them. So first is Anwar, whether he's having any problem with Anwar Halari. So if you could just unmute Anwar, please.
Hi, Avi. Hi, Shraddha. Good to see you
Hi,
again. Sorry, I'm happy to put the question in chat, if that's easier. Or
No,
do you
it's
still want
okay. Now you're unmuted. That's all right.
Yeah, okay. So thank you for the presentation. It's been quite insightful. I just wanted to pick up on the methodology used and just trying to understand the flip side of your research. So you're obviously trying to understand the lived experiences of these young people, and because the lived experiences are so unique and personal, it may not capture the full spectrum of the perspectives or the issue and especially given the age group of your participants who might not be able to articulate their lived experiences in a way that's fully explored. But also, I'll be more interested in sort of the flip side of the research. So what would you expect to be the experience of the same age group of young people from, say, white affluent families, and that might give a better comparison of, okay, how does the experience of, say, your participants differ from that of what you would expect from the opposite side?
Okay, so do you want me to kick off and then other people can join in? Yeah. First thing I would say is, the students were fairly articulate and, maybe they didn't use, necessarily financial language, but they were, very clear about, expressing their understanding of the area. So I don't think articulation for this group of students was an issue. But yes, no, absolutely agree. This was a small exploratory piece of research to go into the schools and talk, have that in-depth conversation with students of this age to try and understand, to deepen our understanding of their perception of the financial education and financial capability, needs, delivery, etc. Absolutely agree that in order to have a much broader understanding, we would need to do sort of similar research in different regions and with different groups of students, so that some of those comparisons are facilitated. So yes, definitely white affluent, white in not so affluent, pick up on gender issues, looking at other categories, and I would say taking quite a nuanced approach about that. So not taking just, say, black, but having a much more nuanced approach of, you know, people within that category who are from different backgrounds. So, you know, if I give the example of, you know, other categories, Asian, looking at South Asian, East Asian, and from Asian from different backgrounds with different experiences. So I think that you know, any piece of qualitative research you would need to add to that, and perhaps a mixed methods approach, so where you would combine the really granular detail that you get from interviews with a survey-based approach where you can look at the responses of more students, but perhaps not those really particular things that students are thinking of that you can get within interviews. So a mixed method would also, I guess, come to some more robust findings.
Katie, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just thank you, Shara. That was really clearly explained. Thank you as well, Anwar, to your question. Just also to add a little bit more of scenario based, which I think would obviously bring out, you know, we did talk about doing some scenario based questions with these students, and I think just developing those so that we have the mixed approach as well is the current plan. Yeah. So I think there's a lot in progress at the moment at PUFin, so hopefully they'll come out in the near future as well. Fidel, would you like to add something to that?
So the only thing I was going to add is obviously this was a small scale pilot study. We don't have all the answers, but obviously we went to schools, and in terms of socioeconomic demographics, although the participants may have been Black, they don't necessarily have the same socioeconomic background. So there was a bit of diversity within the group we spoke to, but we are conscious that obviously for a good study, we need to expand the categories we are looking at, but also look at the differences between the various cohorts. So certainly some food for thoughts, resources permitting, obviously, we could do more.
Yeah. And I think, Anwar, you will see in the second part of the presentation, you see the wealth of data that is available from MAPS, the surveys that they do, that really enables us to understand these issues in much more detail. So there's one more question. I think it can be answered quite quickly. Are your research participants belong to state schools, or you also consider the private school young people? If I may just add to that, would you see, what do you speculate that you will see any difference there?
Okay, so both schools were state schools in Milton Keynes. So both schools had a range of students from more affluent backgrounds and you know, less affluent backgrounds. It would be interesting to see if at private school the results were different. But yes, you know, absolutely, we've just looked at state schools currently, but you know, certainly would be interesting to also look at students from private schools.
Yeah, so I think if I could just...
No, I was going to add that obviously it says not very easy to access to speak to people who are the elite by and large. They put some rear guards in between. So there's always an issue of access. Even if we wanted, we may not have access, but still be a good idea to compare and contrast with various categories, obviously, but it may not be as easy to achieve as it may seem on paper. Thank you.
We did also look at pupil premium as well, but the sample was too small to be able to split. But we did look at that when we were doing the analysis as well.
I'm conscious of time. So there's one, I think, important question by IPAG. How did you define challenging economic circumstances when selecting participants? Was that based on household income, tenure, or other questions?
Right, so challenging, we took the pupil premium as a proxy.
And there's a comment by Paul. Anwar might be interested in the piece of work carried out by Nest, so I'll just publish that so that I think Anwar, that's a really useful resource. Future research. Okay, so thank you very much, Shada, Fidel, Katie. So we have a 5 minutes break, and after that, colleagues from MAPS will present research based on their surveys. I think you'll see that really rich source of data that is available. So I think I'll let them explain some of that data. So 5 minutes break, and we'll be back after 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, I think we start. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I hope you're back. So this is the second part of the presentation today. So this will be Ipek and Paul from the Money and Pension Service. So please, Ipek, please introduce Money and Pension Service and your presentation. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, and hello to everyone. I think we can just maybe move on to the next slide, Paul. So I just explain a little bit about who MAPS is. So I'm just conscious not everybody will know who we are. So it's me and my colleague Paul today from the Insight and Evaluation team at the Money and Pension Service, and just a little bit of background of who MAPS is. So we're an arm's length body of the Department of Work and Pensions. We are funded by levies from financial services and pension schemes. So we don't set policy, but we do help to implement policy in that way. But our main purpose is that we provide people with free, clear, impartial money and pensions guidance. And I say guidance, and I emphasize that it's not advice, but it's guidance. So it's not the regulated sector. And we don't recommend one option over another. So we provide that impartial financial guidance. And the consumer-facing brand, which you may have heard of or may have used even, is the Money Helper. So that's the name that you would have most likely come across if you were searching for any questions on how to manage money. So I think that's a very brief overview of who MAPS is. And I should add, we are also the biggest funder of debt advice, actually. So that's another key area where MAPS operates. Next slide, Paul. So is it 4 years ago now? Yes, 4 years ago. So in 2020, we set out a 10-year framework as MAPS for improving the financial well-being of people across the UK. And that was with a task that was given to MAPS to set a national strategy. So that's called the UK Strategy for Financial Wellbeing. And it has a number of, you will see on the screen, fairly ambitious goals across all ages, basically starting from cradle all the way to retirement. So it has 5 big agendas for change, and they cover meaningful financial education. So that's 2 million more children receiving that financial education by 2030, 2 million more working age folks struggling and squeezed people saving regularly, 2 million fewer people accessing 2 million more people accessing debt advice, 2 million fewer people using credit for everyday purchases, to buy food, to buy other everyday needs, and 5 million more people understanding enough to plan for and in later life. So these are all quite ambitious goals that we hope to, have a big vision, but we hope to continue working with a range of organizations across a number of sectors to help achieve that vision. So we are coordinating the strategy. We are not responsible for delivering on the strategy, but we are helping as and when we can, and we do deliver services as appropriate, to help make that vision happen. And I'll just briefly say that we also have cross-cutting teams that we constantly assess all our services by, and this strategy and the progress. And these are gender, mental health, and ethnicity, which we're going to talk a bit more about now. Next slide, please, Paul. So in this presentation, you're going to hear insight from, as Ali was saying, more quantitative surveys. And these are our 3 flagship surveys that we have looked at, which are the Children and Young People Financial Wellbeing Survey, the Adult Financial Wellbeing Survey, and the Debt Needs Survey. And you will see they are from 2021, range between 2021 and 2023 in terms of the data collection period. And the largest sample size will be from our debt need survey, which my colleague Paul will speak to, where we can actually dive in a bit more with a bit more confidence in terms of what we see for financial, well-being and debt need of Black young adults. Whereas in the other surveys, it's a bit more restricted. But in general, unfortunately, we are not able to go below that umbrella group of Black ethnic group in this presentation, just because base sizes do not allow for looking at differences by Caribbean or African or other, or just by gender or income. These are really important differences. I mean, we are aware, the umbrella group does mask a lot of key distinctions to understand vulnerability. So it will give you a bit of some clues, but it's just scratching the surface, basically, is what I want to say before I dive in. Yeah, next slide, please. So looking at children and young people's data, this is the survey that you just saw in the previous slide that looks at 7 to 17-year-olds. What we do is we ask a number of questions to understand the child's financial capability, look at the parents' behaviors. It's a very long questionnaire, but we based on extensive analysis over the last years, we've decided to come up for our national goal with a definition of what we think should make up key elements of financial education, a meaningful financial education. And that is, if a child is, when asked about, oh, do you remember learning about money in school? If a child says, yes, I remember learning about money in school, and I thought that was useful, if a child is saying that, and or at home, so we ask a number of questions to understand the home element, and or at home, a child is saying, yes, I receive pocket money, and or I have a regular income through a part-time job, which is, we see that more and more in the older age group. So 12 plus will have more of that. If a parent is saying, I set clear rules and I stick to them about how to manage money. And also if a child is involved in spending decisions about how to spend that money. So that could be them just autonomously deciding how to spend. That could be them with their parents, but we want them to be involved in that spending decisions, because literature shows being involved in saving and spending decisions does help to improve financial well-being and capability. So that's how we define financial education, just for the purposes of our survey. Next slide, please. With that definition in mind, when we look at the results, and I know Katie already mentioned this briefly in her literature review, we do find that less than half, overall in the UK, less than half of children and young people aged 7 to 17 are receiving a meaningful financial education. So we still have, quite a bit of work to do. That's less than 4.5 million if you were to look at it in terms of population figures. And so that's the UK average. But then we're able to divide by different ethnic groups. So then we look at different ethnic groups, and we see that actually the Black children and young people are most likely to have received that financial education, with 7 in 10, either through school or home. So this is an overall measure. And that's followed by the Asian group, and then that's the white and the mixed heritage children and young people are same as the UK average. They're performing at the same level. So what is interesting is, of course, we wanted to know, okay, so 7 in 10 Black children and young people are recalling that education. Is it coming from home or school side? And its extent is significantly coming from the school element. So is it, just bear with me. Yes, I was looking at this to remind myself. 6 in 10 actually recall learning about money in school, and close to 100% say they find it useful. So that's interesting. It may be slightly sort of conflicting with one of the findings from Open University's research in terms of the relevance of financial education. Where I think it's mixed findings from the qual research, but from the quant survey at that overall Black, it seems like they are finding it useful. But more importantly, a lot more of them are recalling learning about it. So that's something to bear in mind in terms of how and why they are more likely to receive that financial education. Next slide. But that's not the only thing we looked at, obviously. I looked at the data to see, okay, so that's fine. That's the education part. Well, how are they doing in terms of other what we would call different financial behaviors, in terms of day-to-day money management, active saving. Are they confident in managing money? These are some of the elements that we look at just for any understanding of financial capability. And again, it's a positive picture. So they do as well or above UK average across those two key behaviors that we will always look at, so that active saving and day-to-day money management. And I've given some examples on the slide of what that behavior consists of for us in terms of questions. So that's, shopping around. That's at least kind of saving some of the money you're given. When you're given money, do you keep track of your money using a tool or not? So that's those sort of elements. And what else is interesting is confidence in managing money. So this is an area, I know the research, the qual research said overall they are, moderately confident. And I agree. They, across the UK, I think children are moderately confident. But the Black children and young people, again, are higher than UK average in terms of their confidence in managing money. So that's, again, a positive finding that we see in the data. So 53%, more than half, compared to less than 4 in 10 if you across the UK average. And similar results for mixed heritage background and Asian ethnic group as well. And similarly, more likely to have a current and a savings account and get a choice in their mobile phone package, all of which, tell us they are involved in managing that money. They are sort of getting that experience. So we find these indicators quite important in that way. In terms of what I did look at, okay, so where are they performing not so well? Where are they below the UK average? And where base sizes allow, I'm not able to see any areas where they're actually behind in terms of their financial capability. Nothing that is significant. But bear in mind, these are small base sizes. So I think that definitely calls for a bigger sampled quant survey that just looks at Black children and young people to understand better where they might not be doing so well, because that's not showing in our CYP data. Next slide, Paul. So that was the CYP data. Moving on, let's look at young adults. So that's the 18 to 24 age group and how they are doing. And in general, just in adult life, how are Black adults doing? This is our Adult Financial Wellbeing Survey, which my colleague Chris oversees. And I may not do justice to his slides, but I'll do my best. So we do see overall young adults do have lower financial well-being compared to other age groups. That's something that comes up over and over in our data. And we also see in the 2021 survey, the most recent wave of the Adult Financial Wellbeing Survey, we also see that the Black adults generally have lower financial well-being than white or Asian groups, but they are similar to those from a mixed background. So it's the mixed heritage and the Black adult groups that tend to do worse in terms of different financial well-being indicators. So we do know Black young adults tend to have lower financial well-being based on our data. And when we look at some of the key areas, this is what we call our financial fitness tool. So we've looked at, again, we ask over 180 questions in that survey, but what we've looked at through extensive analysis, again, is we've identified 9 key areas that play into a person's financial well-being, and those are the areas that you're seeing on that 3 blue boxes. So when we look at all these different areas, it does seem where they're struggling more, where they're more likely to struggle, is where it's not being reliant on a credit card or an overdraft, or to have to borrow to buy food or pay bills. So that's the using credit part where they're particularly more likely to be struggling, and also keeping on top of bills and commitments. So that's the area where we see how this score is being lowered and this being kind of pulled down. It's not so much the saving, it's not so much the pensions planning, and that's an important point, because I think my colleague Paul will mention similar findings from his data as well. So that's what we see in the adult data in terms of how young Black adults are performing. Next slide, please, Paul. The other interesting thing that we could say based on our adult data is we do find broadly similar findings in terms of that parent carer role. So they are an important source for young adults of all ethnic backgrounds, really. So that's the same for Black young adults. For day-to-day decisions making, where there are problems, if they needed advice, where they go. So parent care does come at the top, and they are the key source of advice. But it did look like they are making relatively less use of information, advice, and guidance that are not parents and carers. So anything else is less likely to be on their list of food, like, where to go to. So that is an interesting parallel. We felt that's worth mentioning. So I'll stop there. So that was just sort of a brief overview of how how Black young adults are performing, and I'll let Paul go a bit more deeper into what our debt need survey is actually saying for where they stand.
Okay, thank you, IPEC. So what IPEC has just taken us through is what is happening primarily with children, people under the age of 18, when they become an adult, become responsible for their finances. The Debt Need Survey, which is the survey that I run, takes picks up on people who are 18 years plus. It's not longitudinal. It's not like we're following the same people through several years, but it is a large source of data. And again, a different survey, but the same results. 18 to 24-year-olds, we find, are disproportionately facing more financial challenges and debt problems than older people. And that is especially true for people from minority groups. Now, on a positive note, that great behaviour that we saw from both the work done in Milton Keynes and from our Children and Young People survey, which indicates that savings habits have been ingrained in people as children, does carry through to the early stages of adulthood. So Debt Need Survey tells us that 41% of Black 18 to 24-year-olds are saving every month. If you compare that to other groups, so people from Asian ethnicity, it's 38, roughly the same, but 10 percentage points lower for white and mixed ethnicity groups. So that's good. That's good financial behaviour, and it's good to see that that's carrying through to adulthood. Now, where things start to become more difficult for young people in general, and particularly for young people of Black ethnicity, is issues relating to debt. And I just want to very quickly explain that we have this measure. It's called Need for Debt Advice. There is a link at the bottom of the slides when they're sent round. You can have a look at how we calculate this, but it's very factual. We used to use another method. It was called over-indebted, which was a bit subjective, and we decided to move away from. But we asked people about their current arrears, which we split into priority arrears. So that's things like rent, mortgage, utility bills, things that could get you into more trouble, to put it bluntly, if you get behind on them, and other arrears. So, for example, credit and store cards, which obviously people have an obligation to pay, but the remedies available to the creditors are not as severe or impacting. And we also look at things like struggling to pay for food essentials, imposition of prepayment meters from a utilities company, major events, which is bailiff contact or court summonses, that kind of thing, and use of high cost credit. So that's payday lending, logbook loans not around as much as it used to be, or getting into unauthorized overdrafts. So that's the measure. And when we look at how that applies, what we find is rather disappointingly that approaching half of Black people with in that 18 to 24-year-old group meet the criteria for needing debt advice. And so our advice to someone in that situation is that they should reach out to either the people who we fund, or to the many other organisations who provide regulated advice. And that 45%, that compares to a similar figure for young people of mixed or Asian ethnicity, but it is quite a lot higher than the situation for white 18 to 24-year-olds. 31% still isn't great, but it is better than where young Black people are once they've entered adulthood. Now, at least part of this is down to the type of work that these people are doing. So it is the case that these young Black people are in fact working. 3/4 of them are working, but the type of employment is not as secure. So you're looking at things like fixed term contracts, 0 hours contracts, the gig economy. So the most visible example of that is food delivery work, or also other forms of casual work that come and go depending on when you're needed. So we found that nearly half of those young Black workers were employed in that way, 46%. Again, it's similar for people of mixed ethnicity, but it's quite a bit higher than white and Asian people. So those groups are more likely to be doing permanent, working in a permanent work environment. So they have things like benefits and paid leave and security of tenure. So we've come across this in the past. There is a blog, again, link in the slide there if you want to take a look at that in some more depth. So to summarize, there is a positive picture of financial capability and well-being for children and young people from a Black ethnic background, but it doesn't seem to translate into as positive a picture for young adulthood of that group. So there are additional challenges and poorer financial outcomes, and there is a strong case for targeted support at people from that group. Now, data is limited. I know that there's a lot of interviews in the Debt Needs Survey, but it's there to represent the entire UK population. So most of the interviewing is with older people. And unfortunately, there just isn't enough for me to reliably take that overall group and break it down by sort of African or Caribbean people of those ethnicities. So we agree that there is a need for more actionable insight, and in particularly an understanding of the lived experiences of these people, as the Open University did, and also longitudinal work, so that we could link childhood into early adulthood and understand some of the gaps of where things aren't working out as well for them. So that's what we've had. I've been in the slideshow view, so I've not been able to see anything that's come in. So I'm just going to come back into the room. But Ali, it's back to you, I think.
Thank you very much, Paul. So thank you, Beck and Paul, for the presentation. So we'll just wait for a moment for questions. I mean, I've got a couple of questions, but I think I'll let other colleagues ask questions first. So guys, please add your questions to the Q&A facility so that we can read them. Okay. So we've got 2 questions. Okay, so first is from Kareen. How does income inequality factor into your analysis? To what extent is the lack of financial well-being due to poverty and lack of opportunities? And to what extent is due to lack of financial education or financial responsibility?
Those are very big issues to try and unpick. They really are. you know, if you look at the coverage of the survey, you know, it's not it's not the case that those younger Black people are all living in poverty, measured by something like the indices of multiple deprivation, which we do append to our data if people are willing to share their postcode with us. So it can't entirely be explained in that way, but certainly from my side, from the Debt Needs Survey, if you look at the type of work that younger Black workers are doing, you know, that is, I think, undeniably not as secure. It could be that is a positive choice that they make because they want to work in that way, or it could be that is what is on offer to them. But it is also true to say that when I looked more generally on the 18 to 24-year-olds, it is 18 to 24-year-olds of all ethnicities who start to struggle when they just don't have the security of a regular paycheck. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Deepak.
Yeah, I think just to first confirm, unfortunately, we don't have the base sizes to be able to go into those sort of socioeconomic differences within the Black children and young people for the CYP survey. What we did look at is just that socioeconomic gap and how that sort of influences a child's financial capability, but that's not at the Black ethnic group level. But we do know, for example, from our survey data that a 15-year-old from a low socioeconomic background has the same financial capability of an 11-year-old from an affluent background. So we know, and we're aware of some of the socioeconomic gaps that are there, and you know, how much of that is driven by just having not enough money, the parent, you know, and the carer struggling, the household is struggling. How much of that is, you know, not enough financial education that's relevant? That's a very great, and it's a great question, and that's one that we're constantly looking at, how to close that gap, what interventions will work. And actually, just this year, this coming year, we're going to do some qualitative research to talk to children living in low-income households. We'll have those sort of ethnicity, gender, and other themes in mind when we do the sampling, but we want to understand more about that. What's happening? What are the coping factors? What are the, you know, enablers? What are the inhibitors? It's a big question, and it's a question that MAPS constantly grapples with.
Yeah, thank you very much. The next question from Hang Lei. Do you look at debt needs across regions? And if I just add to that, I mean, at what granularity do you look at debt needs?
Need for debt advice?
Yeah.
We look at it actually to quite a granular level. So we have in the past, in the blogs that we put on our website, we have broken it down by government region, so Northeast, Northwest, etc. Also on our website, we publish estimates, and I would emphasize they are estimates, down to local authority and constituency level. So that's taking the survey data, adding administrative data, and providing an estimate. So, you know, we can, you know, we are occasionally asked by parliamentarians, well, what is the need for debt advice in my constituency? And we can answer that question. So we can do it to a great level of granularity, but it is an estimate once we go past government region. I suppose one of the findings that people are sometimes surprised about is the level of need for debt advice in London. It is by some people perceived as being more of a problem in the north of England, and I wouldn't for one moment underestimate the difficulties that people are facing up there. But, you know, London, which is perhaps perceived as being a bit better off, also has a very high cost of living, and the two things cancel each other out, unfortunately, for some people.
And the data goes back to 2018 or 19, or is it?
We haven't. Okay, so the need for debt advice measure, we first put in let me think now, 2020. That's when we sort of created it. So we've got data, I think, for 21, 22, and 23. So we you know can show that, and I believe it's still up on our website because we are asked for it occasionally.
Okay, I've got one more question. That's my question, but I'm just waiting for colleagues to add. No, sorry, I think I can ask. So my question is, what is MAPS doing to help improve the financial well-being of Black adults, Black young adults?
Well, there's a few things. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can start, and
Yeah.
you can add if you want, Paul.
Yeah,
You
sure.
mentioned the
Sure.
consultation work.
Mm.
So while this is not particularly focused on Black young adults, we have a number of things I think we can just give examples of. So one of them is obviously, as an arm's length body, we have to comply with the public sector equality duty. So we do publish. We've set objectives, equality objectives. So we have internal and external objectives. So the external objectives are that we have to deliver the best possible services with the people most in need in mind, with all the different potential and existing vulnerabilities in mind. So that's something we have to consistently do. So that's one of the things we do on a regular basis. But the one I want to talk about and kind of draw attention to is we have a money guidance program. So this is we offer free training and professional development to organizations and practitioners. So this is anyone who can give any type of money guidance is more than welcome to, I think, apply to this program. And we would love for people to be involved and kind of reach out, and I can provide the links later. So, for example, recently, I know the network has delivered a session, and I think Ali, you were there, Shraddha was there, wasn't she, on ethnicity and cultural competency, basically, to help improve that financial guidance that practitioners want to kind of provide to different communities. So that's one of the other examples. And I'll let Paul say a bit more about the consultation work that we have just come to completed.
Sure. Yeah, because I mean, money guidance is kind of train the trainer. So it's it provides people with the skills to actually help people within their community with with money related issues. And I believe it's if you choose to do all the assessments, it's actually an official qualification, which is, I think, is City and Guilds qualification.
Exactly.
So and there have been organisations who represent minority communities who we have helped with that. We have just finished a consultation on debt advice, and we did, we received a lot of responses to that. And what we'll be doing is taking anything from that related to ethnicity and using that when we go through the next round of procuring debt advice. And we will be challenging people who bid for those contracts to demonstrate to us what they can do for minority communities, because as you can see, we know that there is a greater need for advice within those communities. So, those are a couple of the things that we're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another very good question from Karine. I think it's probably for all of us, but I think Peg and Paul, I'll let you try to answer this. Are you, and I think it is for you, by the way, are you planning to include mental health indices as well? Having a bleak future tends to make people respond in different ways. Some fight, some give up, and others flee into escapism. Education may not be enough.
Within debt advice, we acknowledge, and we've been very open about this, that mental health does play a part in that, and it's difficult sometimes to unpick whether the issue of being in debt actually creates the mental health problem, or whether someone who already has a mental health condition is just more likely to need debt advice because it inhibits their ability to work sometimes. It influences decision making, and we know that from another piece of work which we haven't talked about today, where we looked at why people don't seek advice or they drop out, that mental health can be part of it, because that's the big thing that someone has to deal with, and the credit card company saying, well, why, you need to stop paying us, just isn't as important as just trying to get well again. So we do recognize that. In terms of education, yes, I do accept that when someone is in that sort of situation, it is difficult for that to happen. We do have a mental health crisis breathing space, which is something that we are supporting. So this is that's the sort of extreme end when someone has had a diagnosis from a mental health professional saying that that they have a condition which means that they need to have treatment. That does stop creditors from contacting them to give them some breathing space to actually deal with what's going on. So yes, we recognise it, and it is identified. It is a very difficult one to solve, to be honest with you. Ipek, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, apologies. I had to log off and log back in. Yeah, no, not much, except that we did recently publish last year a literature review looking at the impact of money troubles and mental health on the kind of money management of different ethnic minority groups. So we've actually been looking a bit more deeper. It's the University of Bristol and University of Southampton that helped us, a group of academics. So I can share the link in the chat. But it is really interesting findings there as well, both in terms of the impact on the child in the household, but just in terms of the lack of trust and some of the other themes that came out in this qualitative research as well, that has also come out in our literature review. So we are looking at how to do more on that.
That is great. No, I think on that note, I think it's time to stop. So I would like to thank the audience for being here today, and also the presenters, Ipek, Paul, Katie, Fidel, and Shraddha. Thank you very much. And also thank you to Emily for helping us organize this event. So guys, have a great rest of the day. And once again, thank you very much for attending this presentation. Thank you and bye.
Yes. Oh, I saw. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.